listening to the Metal Command Podcast.
Greetings, everybody. Welcome back to the Metal Command Podcast. Tony here with you. And again, I always thank all of you who do support the show. And if you would like to support the show and you like what you see and hear, please hit the subscribe button here on YouTube and hit that little bell to be notified anytime I do post a video. And if you are on any other form of social media, by all means, give me a follow there. And today's subject, and I would love to hear some comments from a lot of you wherever you are viewing this podcast, going to be talking about Paul Di'Anno, the guy that sang on the first two Iron Maiden studio albums, who recently and unfortunately passed away. And the thing is, I don't think people really grasp how important Paul was to the early success of Iron Maiden. Like when you listen to the first Iron Maiden album and you compare that, the first two actually, and you compare that to what was out at the time, they were a game changer. They really were. And the thing about Paul's voice, and this is how it's different from Bruce Dickinson's voice, he had like a swagger and he had kind of like a punk edge to his voice that I really think really attracted a lot of people to liking that band. Like if you go and you ask a lot of bands that, you know, grew up on Iron Maiden, who were highly influenced by them, one or both of the first two albums were instrumental in that. You know, you talk about, you know, Metallica, you know, being into the new wave of British heavy metal. You know, I think I've seen Dave Mustaine, for example, talk about the Killers album being one of his, if not his favorite album with that band in some past interviews. And you just, those first two albums really did have a big impact on people. Killers, for me, is actually my second favorite Iron Maiden album behind Number of the Beast. That's how much I love that record. And it was a very unique album in itself because you had stuff like Prodigal Son, for example, that really was, you didn't really hear anything else like that throughout the band's entire career. So very interesting. It's a very interesting record and a very good album. Purgatory, Innocent Exile. You know, you go to the first album, which, you know, the production could have been a little better. I always used to say I wished Martin Birch produced that one, but it never happened, obviously. But you have Remember Tomorrow, you have Phantom of the Opera, you have Prowler, you have obviously the song Running Free and Iron Maiden. So Paul really did contribute a lot to the early success of that band. On top of that, there were quite a few really cool live recordings. And for me as a fan of Paul's voice, you know, with Maiden, and even some of the stuff he did outside of Iron Maiden, which I'm about to get to here in a second. You had the Maiden Japan EP, which I think is excellent. You also had some various B-sides, you know, you had Women in Uniform, which was a single. You know, some of the early singles, they had like some B-sides, like the Montrose cover, I've Got the Fire. That's definitely a live recording with Paul singing. You have the song Drifter, like an early version of it. That was a B-side as well. But really and truthfully, folks, if you really want to hear him, you know, live at his best, in my opinion, you got to get this. This is the Iron Maiden BBC Archives from the Eddie's Archives box set. Now, you can't buy this individually, but I know you could at least at bare minimum stream it, I believe. I could be wrong. But this came with the Eddie's Archives box set. You know, the thing had 6 CDs in it. This is a 2 CD set. And it features 4 separate shows. So the first part of it, they had the BBC Radio 1 Friday Rock Show from November 14th, 1979. So really before the first Iron Maiden album came out. And there's 4 songs in there, obviously, with Paul. They were doing that, I believe, on, you know, probably some live radio show, and that's where they recorded it. And the recordings are actually pretty good. On the second disc, there's also another show that, in my opinion, is where his vocals shine the most, you know, from a live recording perspective, which 6 songs from the Reading Festival, August 23rd, 1980. So they were, you know, pretty much touring for the first Iron Maiden album. And the interesting part about that, and you know, you can kind of see that right here. I'll kind of show it up here for you. There's an early version of Killers. Now, Adrian Smith was actually not in the band for those recordings. So Dennis Stratton was still playing with them. But there's an early version of Killers that's a little bit different than the one that actually appeared on the Killers album. But if you could stream it or you could find it anywhere, this CD right here, this album, this BBC Archives is awesome. Not to mention you have recordings from the 1988 Monsters of Rock at Donington and, of course, the Reading Festival in 1982. So, if you're a Bruce Dickinson fan, obviously there's stuff on there as well. But the Live at Reading Festival, the 6 songs on these BBC Archives, it's absolutely some of the best stuff I've ever heard Paul sing on. And probably I've been listening to it quite a bit over the last couple of days, and probably it is my favorite live recording with him. The songs they do in that show, you have Prowler, Remember Tomorrow, the early version of Killers, as I pointed out, Running Free, Transylvania, and of course you have Iron Maiden. So, but Paul really was great. He did some really cool stuff outside of Iron Maiden. For me personally, you had the Battle Zone stuff. He had a band called Killers as well. There was an album released under his band name called Killers back in the early 90s. I think it was 1992. It was called Murder One. And that album is absolutely phenomenal. I remember I went back and listened to that one more time just to get a feel for it. It's been a long time, actually, since I had heard that. But, man, it was such a phenomenal album. And I think it's highly underrated. The Battlezone stuff was pretty good. I believe there were 2 albums in the 80s, obviously. Those 2 albums, I like them. But Murder One by Killers, that was the album, from Paul Di'Anno that, for me, is the best thing he did outside of Iron Maiden. Anyhow, I'm going to leave this pretty short. Paul passing away is also a reminder, folks. These guys aren't immortal. We have to appreciate them as much as possible while they are still with us and still capable of playing live and still capable of making music. It was really cool that he did put an album out on the Brave Words label. That album actually is pretty good. So one thing I would like to see, if it were me, whoever has the rights to his old stuff, I'd love to see some more reissues of that stuff, maybe getting it back out there, maybe drawing some attention to Paul and his work outside of Iron Maiden. And it would be really cool if Iron Maiden themselves, if they have anything in the archives that has not been released, let's say from live shows, for example, put those out there. I'd love to see that stuff get released. If it's good and the quality is great, and these are shows from the first couple years in the 80s, for the first couple tours they were doing, world tours. I would love to hear that stuff. I really would. I mean, the stuff on this BBC archive sounds phenomenal. So if anybody's listening out there, I would love, and I'm sure not just myself, but many others would love to see that stuff get reissued. Anyway, that's all I have to say about the subject. It is a bummer that Paul passed away when he did. He definitely went way before his time. And the best way to remember him, listen to anything that he sang on, listen to anything he was a part of from a musical perspective, because Paul did some great work. He really did. And again, as I said earlier in the show, he was definitely instrumental in the early success of Iron Maiden. So that's all I have to say. Let me know what your favorite recording Paul Di'Anno sang on, either with or without Iron Maiden. And leave a comment. What did you think of his voice? Did you really like him? Did any of his other bands really inspire you? Like for me, like Murder One by Killers was a great record. And leave a comment. Let me know what you think. With that said, thanks for watching. Stay metal.